All right, so for a while now, I've been wanting to try out the lens distortion tool inside of Premiere Pro to correct for fisheye lens distortion, but there's only one issue. I don't have a fisheye lens. Oh, one sec, let me get this. Hello? Oh, hey, TTArtisan. You have an 11mm fisheye that you want me to try out? Well, that's convenient. This is the TTArtisan 11mm f2.8 fisheye, which I got in Canon EF mount. And stay tuned because later in this video, I'll be doing a little mini review of it. All right, so jumping into Premiere Pro, it's actually extremely easy to correct for fisheye lens distortion. First of all, you're just gonna want to drag your clip onto the timeline that you want to correct. And here we have the 11mm fisheye. It's hella wide. And then we're just gonna go up to our effects and type in lens distortion, there it is, and drag it onto the clip. And now if we go into our effect controls, scroll down, and we should see that is open right down there. And the one that we want to pay attention to is the curvature section. And there's no magic number to correct for a fisheye because that depends on which fisheye you're using. They all distort the image a different amount, so you just kind of have to eyeball it. So if we come here and we drag it towards the negative, you can see that it is kind of stretching the edges of the image, but that also straightens out any of the lines. You will lose some resolution as you do this. I shot this clip on the Sony a7 IV because I figured the 7K oversampled sensor would kind of help with that loss in quality. And there's no magic number as to what amount works, but for me about -29 looks fine. I mean anywhere from like -25 to -30 for this lens seems to be a pretty good amount to correct the distortion. And to check this, I also shot a clip on my widest rectilinear lens that I have, which is the Canon FD 14mm f2.8, which a little overkill, but if we drag this right on top, we can lower the opacity and kind of use this as a guide to see how much. So you can kind of So if we do about -22 seems to be a pretty good amount here. Now we turn it off. Actually, between the 11mm fisheye corrected and the 14mm Canon FD, they have about the same field of view, which is a little wacky. It does look like on the 11mm, it is the Lego camera in the center does appear to be bigger, so we might still have a bit of distortion there. But for the most part, that is a corrected fisheye lens. One thing that I have noticed with doing this process as well is if you are focusing on something that is at a closer focus distance like this Lego camera was, it will, since it's stretching the edges, if the edges are a little bit farther away and even ever so slightly out of focus because it's a fisheye, it will make it appear like it is like smearing the edges almost. If we turn on the 14mm, we can see that the edge of the chair and the candle are sharp as well as the camera. But if we look at the 11mm, it is very soft and kind of smeary as it's being kind of pulled towards the edges. So this will probably not be as noticeable if you're filming like outside and you're filming something that's a little bit farther away. But for something that is closer to the camera, this might be an interesting thing to use unless you're doing it for some sort of a effect. I did also pick up a Canon FD 15mm f2.8 fisheye, which I have been looking for a while because I want to do a video comparing the 15mm fisheye to the FD 14mm rectilinear to see how close the 15mm with corrections can get to the 14mm, because there is a crazy price difference between those two lenses. So I guess stay tuned if you want to see that. Now, while you can use the lens distortion tool inside of Premiere Pro to correct for fisheye distortion, or even just if you have a lens that has a little too much pin cushion or barrel distortion, you can also use it for that. That's probably a much better use case than correcting for an entire fisheye, especially an 11mm fisheye. It's kind of an extreme example. But if you have a, I don't know, 15, 16, 17mm fisheye, it might be a little easier to correct than something as extreme as this. Also, I haven't found a monitor that lets you correct for fisheye distortion in the monitor, but let me know if you know of one, because that would be kind of cool. But if you can't correct for fisheye distortion in your monitor, it makes it kind of hard to get your framing down while you're out shooting, because you're essentially just going to zoom in your image later, and you might be cutting off resolution or information that you actually want. I would say that this lens distortion tool is good, but don't rely on it to think that like, oh, I can just turn all of my fisheye lenses into rectilinear lenses, because you might have varying results. Before we get into the review portion of this video, I just want to say that TTArtisan did send me this lens to try out and make a video for you guys about, but they are not paying me and they have no input on this video before its release. I can say whatever I damn well please. If this lens sucks, I'm gonna tell you. I wouldn't keep secrets from you guys. I love you. I hope you're doing well. So here we have the 11mm fisheye, and it is hefty. This thing is fully metal and has quite a bit of weight to it. I really like the build quality of this lens, except the focus ring and the aperture ring are ridiculously tight, at least on the copy that they sent me. I don't mind so much the aperture ring being a little tight because it stops me from bumping it, but the focus ring being as tight as it is on this lens is kind of annoying for a lens that essentially just got made. It's honestly, my copy is so tight, I don't even think that I could put follow focus gear on it and have the Tilta 2 motors actually turn it. The aperture on this lens does have click stops, which is nice to see. A lot of these budget TTArtisan and 7Artisan lenses that you will find have smooth apertures, which is fine for video, but they're often far too smooth and they just drift and get bumped super easily. So I'm very happy to see that this has actual click stops, because I much prefer that. As you would expect from an 11mm fisheye, you can't put filters on the front of this lens because it has a little pedal hood design, but that's why I got the Canon EF mount of this lens, which I was pleasantly surprised to see that they had a Canon EF offering, because using it on mirrorless cameras, you can get an adapter that has a little drop-in filter, and you can throw in like a variable ND or a polarizer or something behind the lens. And then you can control the exposure or polarization of the lens without having to find a way to clamp something to the front. And I love that. As far as image quality goes, if your subject is like dead center in the frame, they will look normal, but they will look really funny if they're on the edges of the frame, which is not a fault with this lens. That's just a fisheye distortion effect. I just thought it was really funny and I thought I'd share. Also in the center, the lens is very sharp and detailed. I haven't really noticed anything too crazy that I thought I would mention for any image quality imperfections. So I think, I mean, for the price of this lens, I think it's great in terms of image quality at the center. All right, so this is a budget fisheye lens, and I thought that the flares were gonna be just absolutely wild for this reason, but they're not. They're actually incredibly well controlled. Lenses this wide, especially budget lenses this wide will often flare like crazy because essentially no matter where you're pointing the camera, it's always catching light hitting the front element. But it doesn't really happen on this lens unless you really force it. Wide open, this lens flares a little bit and you get a little loss in contrast when the flashlight is right down the barrel of the lens, but off center, it doesn't flare nearly as much as I thought it would. I applaud TTArtisan for how well they controlled the flaring on this lens, but personally, I'm a huge sucker for some sweet lens flares, and I was really looking forward to some wild 11mm fisheye flares, and I just didn't get it on this lens. So if you don't like flaring whatsoever, this lens is fantastic for you. If you really like flaring, this might not be your cup of tea. This lens actually has a really good minimum focus distance at 0.17 meters, which is like 6.7 inches. And things look a little crazy when you're at minimum focus distance, but they also kind of look hella fun. I'm sure you could get some really wacky effects with this lens at minimum focus. As far as the pricing goes on this lens, it's actually kind of a bargain, and I'm not just saying that because they sent me the lens. It's $215, and for that you are getting a fully metal 11mm f2.8 fisheye that you can get in Canon EF mount, which is kind of rare these days because everything's just in a mirrorless mount, but you can also get them in any mirrorless mount that you want, and it's fully metal. It has click stops on the aperture. The flaring is incredibly well controlled, and it's really sharp and just has good contrast in the center of the frame. You're getting a lot for $215. What I will say is I would not get this lens if I wanted a ultra wide lens that I could correct to turn into a rectilinear lens, because it does not work very well in that sense. It pulls the edges and kind of smears them. So it would be good for, a pickup shot here and there. But as we saw, compared to the FD 14mm, it has the same, if not a little less field of view than a 14mm rectilinear. And there are plenty of other 14mm rectilinear lenses that you can buy for about the same price in Canon EF mount as well. So if you want a rectilinear, ultra wide angle manual lens, I would just say go with like a Rokinon or some other lens that you can find for the same amount of money. If you want a fun budget fisheye lens that is incredibly well built, this is kind of the one to go for. If you would like to pick up this lens for yourself, there is a affiliate link to TTArtisan's store down in the description. If you use that to buy this lens or anything on their site, it just lets them know that I sent you. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but it would really help this channel out. Anyway, that is going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing. It really does help this channel out. And I'll see you in the next one.